All right. Welcome to Sideboard MTG, and it's time for Blue Black Pirates. I've got a deck tech for you, and if you like it, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you like the content in general, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Also, if you want to play this deck or any other deck, Manatraders has got you covered. And if you sign up for their service using my coupon code SideboardMTG15, it'll save you 15% off your first 4 months. That's pretty good savings, right? Now, let's talk a little bit about the deck itself here. What's up, guys? Lap, what's up? We're in our new studio. Things are going to get better. I've got some background stuff coming. I hope you guys like it. Anyway, we're going to talk about this blue-black Pirates deck here. Now, if you guys watch some of the other videos, you've seen me kind of pull this deck out from time to time, as it's a very cheap deck, and I actually had most of the cards. So let's talk a little bit about the deck itself. I guess we'll start with the land base. Yes, it's blue-black, but the reason we're not actually splashing into that third color, red, for the red pirates is because I've got a lot of colorless lands here. Yes, we've got the 4 drowned catacombs, the 4 fetid pools. Yes, we have the the islands and the swamps, but the colorless, this is where things get kind of important for us. We've got 4 copies of Grasping Dunes and 2 copies of Field of Ruin. Now, the one thing that this deck does not handle very well is destroying a graveyard. Now, this deck is not very good at getting rid of a graveyard, and I wanted to squeeze in some crooks or maybe even scavenger grounds, but in most of the situations I just was not able to do so, and I had to back off of some of my colorless lands. I originally had scavenger grounds in the deck. Yes, scavenger grounds was in the deck, Lamp. But I had scavenger grounds in the deck originally, and then I ended up taking it out because I kept getting stuck without enough color, and then I tried to back off my Field of Ruin, and there's just so many of those flip lands out there right now that I just really feel that I need this land destruction. Also, in the sideboard, I wanted to squeeze in some Crooks of Condemnation, but we actually needed a little bit more life gain than we needed Crook. So, with this, we're actually going to hope that we can deal with, the cards that can get things back from the graveyard, and in most situations we can. And how we do that is thanks to our great land base here, the Grasping Dunes. Now, I guess before I go much further into the Grasping Dunes, I need to point out this one works a little bit different from the other deserts. With most other deserts, you can actually sack any desert to the ability of the desert you're wanting to use. Well, with Grasping Dunes, you actually have to sacrifice Grasping Dunes itself. So it's another reason that even though the curve of this deck is very, very low, it's one of the reasons that we have so many lands. Yes, there are 25 lands in this deck that tops out at 4 converted mana cost. Now, there are 3 copies of Ruin Raider in here, and that's one of the reasons I didn't want to have a very high converted mana cost. And Ruin Raider in aggressive matchups is one of the cards that I end up taking out because I can't afford the life loss. But that is not the only source of card draw or advantage that we have. Now, we have a couple different types of advantage in this deck. We have straight card advantage, where we can put a Curious Obsession on one of our mini flyers and start drawing cards that way. We have card advantage on every time we attack, we can draw some cards through our Ruin Raider, or Bob, if you will. We can draw some cards through this, or we can get a little bit of card advantage from something like a Fathom Fleet Captain. Now, Fathom Fleet Captain allows us to add more permanents to the board without actually spending a card from our hand. And no, that's not exactly card advantage, but if they do require a removal spell to remove one of those cards that we've added to the board, like one of those 2/2 pirate with Menace, if they have to remove one of those, at that point we've actually gained a little bit of card advantage from using Fathom Fleet Captain. It's one of the reasons I really wanted Fathom Fleet Captain in the deck, is just because it is a source of advantage, not necessarily card advantage, but if you do get to start putting permanents onto the battlefield without actually having to spend cards from your hand, it is a very, very good place to be. And we have 4 copies of Siren Stormtamer to help protect our Fathom Fleet Captain. Also, when you have, Warkite Marauder, or heaven forbid you get two of these things on the battlefield, it becomes extremely hard to block you because all of their creatures just do not block well in combat versus a Warkite Marauder. And one of my favorite things to do with a Warkite Marauder is go ahead and buff it up with a Cartouche of Ambition, and then we're swinging for 3 in the air with lifelink. And that negative 1/1 counter that we put on the creature, as soon as you actually trigger Warkite Marauder's ability for attacking, and you put that on the creature that already received the neg 1/1 counter, it will then be a 0/1 without any abilities that has a neg 1/1 counter on it. So as soon as the ability resolves, the creature will die, unless the creature had +1/1 counters on it when you put the neg 1/1 counter on it, which would have removed one of the +1/1 counters. So you do have to, it does have to fight a little bit against those snake decks and things like that, but you can really pick off some of their creatures here, and we've got some other ways to deal with creatures other than just our lands and some fatal pushes. No, also, of course, the Cartouche of Ambition. You put a neg 1/1 counter on the Scarab God or a Hazard and swing, though they're gone. Hazard will lose his indestructible. He will become a 0/1 without indestructible and then die due to the neg 1/1 counter being on him. Now, the same will work for the Scarab God. If he doesn't have any abilities, his return from the graveyard ability will not trigger. You will not get that delayed trigger to return him from the graveyard at the end of turn when he dies, which is really, really cool. It's one of the reasons I wanted to run the Warkite Marauder along with the Grasping Dunes. So this deck is kind of all about that. Now, we've got the 4 Warkite Marauders, we have the 4 Fathom Fleet Captains, and we have 4 Kitesail Freebooters. Now, this is our main board Duress. Really, really good card, and if we do happen to bring in the Scarab God out of our sideboard, we do have 2 copies in the sideboard. Now, I'll talk about those a little bit more as we cover the rest of the sideboard, but if we do bring out the Scarab God from the sideboard, it allows us to bring back cards like Kitesail Freebooter or any of the other cards that we have. It allows us to bring those back at instant speed, so we can have this enter the battlefield trigger at the end of their draw step before they actually get into main phase or something like that, just to get a look at their hand. There's a lot of really cool interactions we can do. I also like the Cartouche of Ambition here because it does give us a little bit more life gain, and against certain decks that life gain is really, really important. I do like this against those mid-range decks. It allows us to keep getting in, because against those decks we really don't want to be taking out our Rune Raiders. This kind of comes out against red deck because we can't afford the additional loss of life, but Rune Raider is a really, really good card, and against mid-range decks, having that ability to gain a little bit of our life back is extremely beneficial. I also really like the fact that this will pump our Fathom Fleet Captain so that he can't just die to a 1 toughness creature or 1 power creature. Now, granted, they have to put 2 in front of him, but in a lot of cases the other creature will just be a 0/1. Even if it was flying before, by the time that they get to blockers, it won't have flying anymore because loses all abilities. Yes, Lamp, that's how that works. Are you a judge? I'm a judge. Are you a judge? All right. Anyway, so he's trying to take over the stream, guys. Anyway, all right. So this is not supposed to be a co-stream, Lamp. Anyway, we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the ways that we hold the other creatures back. And we've got Lookout's Dispersal, we've got Fatal Push, and the very volatile card of Hostage Taker. Now, this is a card that I'm kind of on the fence about, and I really, really was hesitant about playing Hostage Taker with Rune Raider, but I do happen to like Hostage Taker, and in certain matches I will take it out, and it is a little bit risky from time to time, but if you can manage to have your Siren Stormtamer down, or you can, have have a look at their hand before you actually cast your hostage taker, you'll know whether or not they actually have the kill spell for it, and that is very, very important. So with this type of deck where we can actually get a glance at what's going on the other side of the battlefield, it does take a lot of stress off of actually casting hostage taker, and I really, really like that about this deck. Also, the sideboard here has a lot of really nice cards in it, and against control, March of the Drown was just 1 mana, draw 2 cards, and that's just another source of card advantage for us. 1 mana, spend 1 card, get 2 cards back, and it gives us the selection, and it's another reason that I kind of backed off of the Graveyard Hate. If you really wanted to put in a Crook or something like that, you could do so, but I actually just decided to not run Graveyard Hate in this deck. Now, we do have 3 copies of Duress, 3 copies of Negate to help round out our counter package to go along with our Lookout's Dispersal in the main board. Now, Duress and Negate work really, really well with this, and it gives us that ability to be a mid-range deck. Now, there's one pirate in here that you guys might have noticed is not in the list, and that is the Direfleet Poisoner. Now, you might want to back off of a Hostage Taker, or maybe even a single copy of Ruin Raider, as I did take Ruin Raider out in quite a few matchups if it was aggro. So if you wanted to, you could possibly take out a Hostage Taker and a Ruin Raider and squeeze in a couple Direfleet Poisoners, but I personally think that I really want to have my Fathom Fleet Captains and my Warkite Marauders, as the only real reason that I would need the Death Touch would be against Carnage Tyrant. And that card is becoming more and more powerful. However, in most situations, we can just get over it. And I know the term's normally under it, but I mean flying. With our flying creatures in our cartouche, we can continue to chip in and do damage before Carnage Tyrant can hit the battlefield. And remember, there's not a lot of cards with reach, so that's another handy part about Warkite Marauder. By the time it attacks, you can remove the reach creatures, or you can remove their flying creatures and still just get in over the top. And that's one of the reasons I wanted all the evasion on our creatures, because it makes Ruin Raider just that much better. We get to attack almost every turn without consequence. Also, the Curious Obsession, it does give another +1/+1 to our creature, and that creature, when it connects, gets to draw a card. So there has been a few times where I got to stack up even Kitesail Freebooters with a Curious Obsession and a cartouche, swinging for 3 in the air, gaining 3, gaining a card. Man, good times. So that all works really, really well with cards like March of the Drown, Duress, Negate. Now, against those those aggro decks, we will be taking out the Ruin Raiders in some cases, and for that, we're going to be bringing in a little bit more removal. And that removal is in the form of Moment of Craving. No, there's no Vraska's Contempt here, and as much as I would really like Vraska's Contempt, we just don't need it. The plan is to protect the Warkite Marauder, and then we can use cards like March of the Drown to get it back, or we can use cards like Moment of Craving to finish off those 0/1s and gain a little bit of life. So again, we have more life gain here. The next card, Aethersphere Harvester, the exact same thing. Now, you do not want to be enchanting your cartouches on, you do not want to be putting a cartouche of Ambition on your Aethersphere Harvester, and there are no other ways to actually gain energy in this deck, other than, say maybe a Hostage Taker taking over, maybe a Glint Sleeve or something like that. But there are no other ways to gain energy, so you're just going to spend your energy on your Aethersphere Harvesters, so make sure you get those triggers in. And then, of course, the last card in the sideboard here are 2 copies of the Scarab God, which we will bring in against anything that we do not think has Vraska's Contempt. Struggle to Survive, cards like that, we're more than okay with them having to spend those on the Scarab God. It's just card decks that have a lot of copies of Vraska's Contempt. We just don't really want to go down that path. We don't want to get into a Scarab God versus the Scarab God fight. We would rather just continue to get in, be as aggro as possible, and finish those games before they get their loop started. Now, there are a ton of cards that you could put in this deck. You could put Search for Azkantas in. You could put, you know, a number of different counter spells. You could put a lot of cards in this deck. However, I wanted to keep the curve extremely low, and you know, this deck has a lot to do with a deck that won a PPTQ in Arizona before I left there. And a friend of mine, VP, gave that to me, and I used that as the backbone to build this particular deck. As the meta has changed, and that deck didn't run cartouches, and there's a couple other changes, and the sideboard's actually quite a bit different. But the deck did run, you know, March of the Drown and Warkite Marauder and Fathom Fleet Captain. Now I have changed the numbers a little bit on some of these things, as you know, I felt that the meta has changed a little bit. So I did think that it was a really good deck, and I like the idea of Curious Obsession in a deck that had a lot of flyers. Just that pure card advantage of continuing to be able to draw cards is kind of what this Pirates deck is all about. So I hope you guys enjoy the deck, and if you want to watch the League played with it later this evening, there should be a post up already. So if you guys want to see that, you can. We will be playing that later today. So I hope you guys enjoy, and we'll see you next time here on Sideboard MTG.